Hello, good day to everyone, and welcome to another lesson in understanding culture, society, and politics. And for today's lesson, we are going to talk about state and non state institutions. But before that, let's have the objectives. At the end of the session, learners are expected to first describe the different forms of state and non-state institutions. Second, differentiate the functions of state and non-state institutions. And third, appraise the state and non-state institutions in relation to personal development and societal progress. All right, let's start the lesson with a short game. I have here five logos of government agencies here in the Philippines. So, what you will do is identify what these are based on the definition or description that I will provide. Let's begin. For number one, it is an agency of the government that protects its territories and boundaries. So, what is this? Right, that is AFP or the Armed Forces of the Philippines. Number two, it is a state agency that looks after municipalities and barangays. What is this? Well, it is pretty obvious already. Yes, the correct answer is DILG or Department of Interior and Local Government. Let's have number three. It is an agency of the government that ensures quality education. What is this? Of course, it is an agency where we are a part of. It is the Department of Education. Let's go straight to number four. It is an agency that creates public infrastructure like school buildings, roads, and bridges. What is this agency? It is DPWH or Department of Public Works and Highways. Doing good so far? Now let's have number five, the last one. It is an agency of the government that looks after the welfare of Filipinos working overseas. What is this agency? Okay, it is OWA or Overseas Workers Welfare Administration. Congratulations for finishing the first activity. Now, the agencies that we just talked about earlier are what we call the state institutions. Let's have the next activity. This is magic letters, magic pictures. So what I would like you to do is to look at the images on screen and pay attention to the boxes with magic letters attached to them. All right? And after that, you need to identify or guess the 8 magic letters and look for the concept that we're looking for today. Are you ready? So, what are we looking for? We're looking for the concept non-state. Very good. At this point, based on the words formed in the previous activity, I would like everyone to identify the name of each picture presented on screen. Let's start with number 1. The first picture is banks. Second, cooperatives. Third, trade unions. Fourth, corporations. Fifth, civil organizations. We will explain each concept as we go on with the lesson. Now, let's talk about state and non-state institutions. All states in the world, including our own, the Philippines, formulate their own government agency to achieve the needs of its people. And what are these agencies, do you think? Basically, we already talked about some of these government agencies earlier. For example, the Department of Education, DILG, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, even the Department of Health. However, in most democratic society, just like the Philippines, the state government allows business individuals, corporations, and nonprofit organizations to deliver goods and services for the citizens. What do you think of this statement? A country can be associated with how a family functions. Do you agree with the statement at some point? Why? Now, this will form part of your activity today, so kindly write your answer on the Edmodo activity section that I provided. Let me provide some explanations related to the statement. Like some government leaders, there are also authoritarian parents who determine the future of their children. I'm pretty sure that some of you could relate to it. So, in your case, what kind of parents do you have? Do you have authoritarian or democratic parents? Well, sometimes our parents can be both, right? Depending on the situation. On the other hand, there are lenient parents who allow their children to grow with minimum restrictions. So, in general, parents must do necessary actions to feed a family, provide proper clothing, send children to school, give a decent shelter, give medicine in times of sickness, and save some budget or resources in case of emergency. Basically, these are the roles of parents. Yet, no matter how parents work to make both ends meet, there are always some issues left undone. On the contrary, family remains as a family no matter what happens, no matter how imperfect they are. Their obligation is to help one another to avoid problems, right? And also, parents must utilize all resources to meet their basic needs or perhaps provide not only their needs but also their wants. But remember, it is not the sole responsibility of parents in making life easy, right? Why? Because children play a vital role in the family by being responsible and sensitive individuals who do their own share at home. What are these examples? For example, helping in the household chores, or even the simplest things like turning off the lights or other appliances when not in use. And for students like you who will be graduating from high school, probably try to apply for a scholarship in college to ease the burden of tuition fees. But you can only get one if you have been a good student in high school, have you? On the other hand, the government is trying its best to provide the necessity of its people by allocating its resources to meet the demands of its citizenry. But how does the government allocate its resources to the people? Through what? This is basically through the different government agencies, for example, the DSWD, the Department of Agriculture, etc. However, just like any other ordinary family, no matter how the government works to make both ends meet, there are always issues that need to be addressed. So, this is when the non state institutions come in. Now, non state institutions are created to back up the government in filling in the gap between the state and its people. Just like what is happening nowadays, since the government has not been able to fully address the needs of people, non state institutions are helping out in providing social services, such as donating foods to the less fortunate individuals or the most vulnerable sectors of our society. And they have been doing this even before the Marcos era. So, non state institutions help in uplifting the conditions of the people in general. Some examples of non-state institutions are banks, corporations, trade unions, cooperatives, development agencies, civil organizations, and transnational advocacy groups, which are created to help improve the condition of sectors of our society. And we've heard of several NGOs or non-government organizations and POs or people's organizations who have been instrumental in easing the merciful situation of the underprivileged families. Now, before we dig deeper into the different concepts related to non-state and state institutions, let's have the definition of institution first. So basically, it is an organization, establishment, foundation, society, or the like devoted to the promotion of a particular cause or program, especially one of a public, educational, or charitable character. Now, there are different models of social institutions used in different countries nowadays, most of which are inspired by the long history of their country, while others are influenced by other nations. How about in the Philippines? Is it a product of colonization or inspired by the long history of our country? Well, I can say it's a combination of both, especially because some of our social institutions are patterned after the US. Now, there are two major types of state or social institutions: the communist, which is based on command economy, and the democracy, based on capitalist. Most communist countries, like the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or USSR and North Korea, are governed by the respective governments alone. They do not allow private companies or individuals to do business in their land. Thus, the people have no opportunity to choose because the government decide what is best for their own citizens. However, democracy is a kind of government based on capitalism, where the government provides the major industries but also allows private entities or individuals to produce goods and services for the people. Thus, citizens are given much freedom to choose for themselves. Now, there are certain organizations that help keep these basic institutions in place. On the political side, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or AFP, helps the government maintain peace and order throughout its territory. Then we have the local government units, or LGU, which is created to cater the needs of the local barangays or communities. Now, LGUs are basically under DILG, or the Department of Interior and Local Government, which is the executive department of the Philippine government responsible for promoting peace and order, ensuring public safety, and strengthening local government capability, which aimed towards the effective delivery of basic services to the citizenry. We also have the Department of Education, or DepEd, which ensures the quality of education based on the needs and norms of the society. Then we also have the Department of Health, which is responsible for ensuring access to basic public health services to all Filipinos. And this is through the provision of quality health care and regulation of providers of health goods and services. Now, the different branches of government, which are the legislative, executive, and judicial, which are organized political bodies, are also called state institutions. Now, let's talk about the different non-state institutions. Normally, in a democratic country like the Philippines, major industries must be under the control of the state or government, right? For example, major banks, petroleum, transportation, and even communication, because they are vital in the economy of the country. However, what has been happening in the recent years is that these industries are being sold to private entities to carry away the burden from its operation and maintenance. That's why privatization was quite controversial in the past. Now, when you say privatization, this occurs when a government agency that provides public services is converted into a privately owned organization. Well, services often remain, however, they can be delivered on for-profit basis, then strictly operated for public benefit. But one thing is for sure, the state recognizes the role of private sector on national growth. What are these privatized enterprises in the Philippines? So these days, private corporations headed by executives control the major industries in the country with very minimum government supervision. Most of these are petroleum like Shell, Caltex, and Petron. For telecommunication, we have Smart Globe and PLDT. For transportation, we have Cebu Pacific and Philippine Airlines, etc. And believe it or not, these entities significantly affect the lives of the people, either directly or indirectly. Now let's take a look at the historical background of some of the entities that have been privatized. First, we have PLDT, which was established in November 1928, and it started as a government entity. In December 1967, Ramon Cuanco bought its shares and took control of PLDT. Then in the 70s, it was nationalized by the government of then President Marcos, and in 1981, it became the country's telephone company. Then in 1986, after Marcos was overthrown, it was re-privatized. The Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System, or MWSS, came into being after the Republic Act 6234 was enacted in 1971, which dissolved the NAWASA. Then in 1997, through the Republic Act 8041, also known as the Water Crisis Act, paved the way for the privatization of MWSS. And it has been a private entity since 1997. Petron Corporation, which was started by Standard Vacuum Oil Company in 1933, became a Philippine partner in 1962. Then in 1973, President Marcos created the Government-Owned and Controlled Corporation, or GOCC, Philippine National Oil Company, PNOC. In the same year, Petron Corporation was established as a marketing arm of PNOC. In 1993, Petron's partial privatization started when 40% of its total equity was sold to the Arabian American Oil Company, or Aramco. Then 20% of Petron's equity was sold to the private sector through an initial public offering. Then in 1998, the Ramos administration approved RA 8479, the second law on downstream oil deregulation. In the Philippines, we have the most popular TV stations like ABS-CBN, GMA7, ABC5, and PTV5. They are duty-bound to serve the public by giving current news and information, but more so entertainment to attract viewers. Now, the more viewers a station has, the more product advertisements coming in, and thus the profit comes along. This is why television networks in the country are becoming antagonistic, as shown in their publicity ratings. Now, where do you go if you wish to have a car through a car loan? Yes, if one wants to have a car but do not have enough money to buy one, then they can find a bank that offers a car loan arrangement. How about if someone wishes to own a business but hesitant because he or she might fail? Well, this is quite common nowadays. It's the stock market. Yes, he or she may consider the stock market and be a shareholder in a corporation without doing the legwork of filing, applying for a registration, etc., and without risking our capital. Although the stock market is kind of risky, but not as much as establishing your own business, right? What if you are a worker and wants to have a better compensation? What should we do? Well, he or she may join and be a part of a trade union. The banks, corporations, trade unions, these are just some of the examples of non-state institutions. These are non-government organizations operating to satisfy many of our short-term and long-term, small-scale and large-scale, and tangible and intangible demands. So to reiterate, non-state institutions include the following: banks, corporations, trade unions, cooperatives, development agencies, civil organizations, and transnational advocacy groups. What do banks do to us? Banks basically help us keep our money, avail different kinds of loan, and exchange currencies. Now, how do banks earn? That is the biggest question. Well, the accumulated money of the bank is invested to some projects to gain profit. So this is how banks pay their workers and depositors interest, well, depending on the agreed terms. But not only that, because banks also help the country by providing financial assistance to those entrepreneurs who want to create or expand their business. And by doing so, or in return, these entrepreneurs also provide job opportunities among local citizens. Although there are state and non-state banks in the country, both types serve their respective purposes. Yet, most depositors choose state banks because the government itself backs it up, thus the possibility of bankruptcy is very small. And through the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, it is but only to a minimum extent. Like in the case of certain banks, when a bank declares bankruptcy, each depositor could only receive a portion of their deposit. A corporation is another example of non-state institution, and a corporation is owned by a group of people but has a separate legal identity because the owners of a corporation are not responsible for its own debts. Corporations offer stocks, which determines the level of ownership, as well as bonds, which allows one to earn interest. For example, if you're a stockholder of a certain company, like for example Jollibee, and own 30% of the share, then that determines your ownership of that particular corporation. So these generate large amounts of capital, which is needed for growth. Now, some well-known corporations and top corporations are San Miguel Corporation, SM Investments Corporations, Ayala Corporation, Petron, etc. Since a corporation is associated with various industries, it needs a huge workforce to run and operate. And again, they provide job opportunities to a number of workers in the country, thus help lessen the problem of poverty. There are some entrepreneurs who are only after for profit and are a bit abusive in a sense that they tend to maximize working hours and minimize wages as much as possible. So this is where the trade union steps in, and trade unions are other examples of non-state institutions. So what do they do? Basically, trade unions look after the well-being of the workers. And how? By raising issues such as low salary, lack of compensation, etc. to the management. Sometimes, though, this kind of negotiation ends up with work stoppage or strike until the demands of both sides are met. So trade unions are created to protect the labor force of the country. Now, do you agree that workers are essential to the creation of goods and services for the citizenry? Yes, of course, definitely. In the Philippines, the Trade Union Congress of the Philippines, or TUCP, has the largest membership. In fact, it is now a party list in the country. Then we have the cooperatives, which are also non-state institutions. Cooperatives are made up of people with common interest who agreed to work together for easy, safe, and affordable access to commodities, loans, and other services. So these cooperatives are created to help and empower one another with a minimum help from the government. Examples of these cooperatives are the farmers' cooperatives and the teachers' cooperatives. Next up, we have development agencies, which are also non-state institutions. Now, development agencies promote progress by engaging in projects, policymaking, and dialogue. Some countries with active agencies in the Philippines are Japan or JICA, Canada, SIDA, and USA, USAID. But there are also those who provide financial assistance, for example, the Asian Development Bank or ADB. Now, these development agencies work as a bank that provides financial assistance to important projects of the country. Examples of these are the creation of a bridge that connects one province to another, or road construction that helps ordinary farmers transport their products, which are put into reality through the help of these agencies. Another example of non-state institution is what we call the civil organization. So civil organizations are groups or organizations working in the interest of the citizens, but operating outside of the governmental and business sectors. So civil society organizations are considered to be the country's key social and political forces. Basically, they have been a part of our history, and their presence is practically everywhere, especially when a community is struck with calamities like a devastating and life-threatening typhoon or earthquake, and even when it is challenged by a pandemic just like the COVID-19. In the Philippine context, civil society organizations are often associated with non-government organizations or NGOs since they are among the most prominent ones in terms of their contribution to Philippine democracy. A few examples of these civil organizations in the Philippines are the Ibon Foundation, Habitat for Humanity, we have here the PAWS, and Haribon Foundation. But of course, it's not only limited to that. Civil organizations also include academic institutions, research teams, mass media, and religious organizations. Civil organizations provide facts about life's various realities to influence policy making. Now, these organizations are created to expose the conditions of the marginalized sector of the society by using mass media as its platform as they raise critical issues to the government. Last but definitely not the least is the Transnational Advocacy Group. Transnational advocacy groups influence the government to take action on matters commonly neglected. And now, the group may be a national or an international organization that promotes and advocates progress and development related to particular issues of the society. Perfect examples of these groups are Greenpeace and Human Rights Watch. To give you a brief background of the two groups, Greenpeace is basically an independent organization that does not take money from corporations or government. So it is an independent global campaigning organization that acts to change attitudes and behavior, to protect and conserve the environment, and to promote peace. They usually expose environmental criminals and challenge government and corporations when they fail to live up to their mandate to safeguard our environment and our future. On the other hand, Human Rights Watch defends the rights of people worldwide. They basically investigate abuses, they expose the facts widely, and pressure those with power to respect rights and secure justice. It is an independent international organization that works as part of a vibrant movement to uphold human dignity and advance the cause of human rights for all. And lastly, don't forget to answer the activity on Edmodo. That ends the discussion on state and non-state institutions. If you like this video, please don't forget to share it to your friends and, of course, subscribe to my channel. Thank you.